The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath when 8-year-old Mia quietly slipped her hand into her mother's and stared at the floor. Hundreds of eyes followed her as she entered the charity dinner beside her mother, Sarah Kensington, one of the youngest CEOs in Chicago. Sarah was known across the country for building a billion-dollar healthcare company from nothing. She could command boardrooms, negotiate impossible deals, and stand confidently in front of thousands. But that night, despite the designer gown and flashing cameras, she looked more vulnerable than anyone in the room, because beside her stood the one person she could never protect from every pain. Her daughter had never spoken a single word. Imagine being a parent who would trade every achievement, every dollar, and every success just to hear your child say "Mom" one time. What if you were in Sarah's place? Would all the trophies and headlines still matter? For years, Sarah had carried that quiet heartbreak alone. Mia had lost her hearing after a severe illness when she was only a toddler. The doctors had tried everything. Specialists offered hope, then disappointment. Sarah spent nights sleeping in hospital chairs and days pretending to be strong. As her company grew, so did her guilt. Every business victory felt strangely empty because the person she loved most still faced a world that often forgot how to understand her. The dinner that evening was supposed to celebrate community leaders and charitable work. Sarah almost left Mia at home with a nanny. Large events made her daughter uncomfortable. People often smiled politely but quickly looked away when communication became difficult. Mia had grown used to being the quiet child in crowded rooms. Yet something made Sarah bring her anyway. Maybe she was tired of hiding her daughter from a world that needed to learn compassion. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Wealthy donors laughed over expensive meals. Business leaders exchanged cards and handshakes. Mia sat silently beside her mother, observing everything with curious blue eyes. Sarah noticed the familiar pattern almost immediately. People greeted her warmly. Then they noticed Mia. Then came the awkwardness. A few guests attempted small gestures before moving on. Others simply smiled and returned to conversations they found easier. Mia lowered her eyes. Sarah's heart broke a little more each time. Across the room sat a man named James Alden. Unlike most guests, he wasn't a CEO or politician. He had been invited because of his work running a community youth center on Chicago's South Side. He was a single father raising a 10-year-old son after losing his wife in a car accident years earlier. Life had not been kind to James. There were months when he worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. There were nights when grief sat so heavily on his chest that sleep never came. But somehow hardship had given him something many wealthy people lacked. It had given him the ability to truly see others. While conversations buzzed around him, James noticed the little girl sitting quietly beside the famous CEO. He noticed the loneliness in her eyes. He noticed how she watched people instead of joining them. And he noticed something else, the way her hands occasionally moved when communicating with her mother. A memory stirred inside him. Years earlier, James's late wife had been a teacher at a school for deaf children. During their marriage, she had taught him American Sign Language. At the time, he learned it simply to support her passion. He never imagined it would matter years later. As dinner continued, Sarah excused herself briefly to speak with event organizers near the stage. For a moment, Mia sat alone. Most people barely noticed. James did. He slowly walked across the ballroom. Several guests assumed he wanted to introduce himself to the famous CEO. Instead, he stopped beside the little girl. Mia looked up cautiously. Then James smiled and gently raised his hands. The next few seconds changed everything. In fluent sign language, he asked a simple question. "How are you tonight?" Mia froze. Her eyes widened. For a second, she seemed unsure whether she had understood correctly. Then something remarkable happened. A smile spread across her face so quickly and brightly that it seemed to light the entire room. She answered. James responded. And suddenly, the silent little girl who had spent the evening isolated became a child again. Her hands moved excitedly. She talked about her favorite books. She talked about drawing pictures. She talked about the golden retriever she adored. She talked and talked and talked. For the first time that night, someone wasn't speaking around her. Someone was speaking to her. Sarah turned from across the room and saw her daughter laughing. Actually laughing. The sight stopped her cold. For a moment, she couldn't understand what she was seeing. Then she noticed James's hands moving. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. The room around her disappeared. Business deals, investors, awards, cameras, none of it mattered. All she could see was her daughter finally feeling included. Sarah quietly returned to the table and watched. Mia didn't even notice her. She was too busy sharing stories with someone who understood her. And somehow that made Sarah cry even harder. Years of exhaustion, guilt, and fear suddenly surfaced. She had spent so much energy energy trying to help Mia fit into the hearing world that she forgot how powerful it was when the world simply met Mia where she already was. As the evening continued, James remained beside her daughter. Guests began noticing. Conversation slowed. People watched the joyful exchange unfolding in front of them. Many had never seen sign language before. What began as curiosity slowly became something deeper, perspective. They realized the child had never lacked a voice. The world had simply failed to listen. Later that evening, James shared a little of his story with Sarah. He spoke about losing his wife, raising his son alone, and the difficult years that followed. Sarah shared her own struggles as a mother, balancing impossible responsibilities. Neither expected to reveal so much. Yet pain has a strange way of recognizing itself. By the end of the night, they felt less like strangers and more like two people who had survived storms no one else could fully understand. Before leaving, Mia tapped James's shoulder. She signed something that made him pause. Then his eyes became wet. Sarah asked what her daughter had said. James smiled softly. Mia said this was the first fancy dinner where she didn't feel invisible. Sarah could no longer hold back her tears. On the drive home, Mia rested her head against the car window with the peaceful expression of someone whose heart felt lighter. Sarah glanced at her daughter through the rearview mirror. For years, she had prayed for miracles. She imagined miracles would arrive through doctors, treatments, or medical breakthroughs. Instead, one arrived through simple kindness. One man, one conversation, one decision to notice a child everyone else overlooked. Months later, Sarah's company partnered with James's youth center to create programs supporting deaf children and their families across Illinois. What began with a brief encounter at a dinner eventually changed thousands of lives. But Sarah never forgot the lesson she learned that night. The most powerful thing we can give another human being is not money, status, or success. It is the feeling that they matter, that they are seen, that they belong. And sometimes the smallest act of understanding can heal wounds that years of effort could never reach. As Mia grew older, she would remember many things about that evening. But most of all, she would remember the moment someone chose to learn her language before asking her to learn theirs. And that memory stayed with her long after the music ended and the lights went out.